Ever think about how a bunch of stone walls held off whole armies for years? Medieval castles weren't just big homes for lords to sip wine in. They were battle-ready machines, built to beat the odds. Their power wasn't just in how strong they were. It was in how smart they were. Picture a 1347 siege war drums thumping, siege towers creaking, arrows zipping like a medieval spam filter gone wild. These fortresses were designed to make invaders wish they'd stayed home. This ain't Game of Thrones with dragons and epic speeches, it's the real, gritty story of how castles fought back. History buffs, grab some chips, hit that subscribe button, and let's dive into the stone-cold genius of medieval defense. It all started with one question. Where to build the castle builders chose high ground whenever possible hills. Cliffs, rocky outcrops forcing attackers to fight gravity before they even reach the walls. The ultimate medieval workout plan: climb a steep hill in full armor while people throw rocks at you. At Edinburgh Castle in Scotland, attackers had to trudge up a steep volcanic rock that left them exhausted before battle even began. Water features provided instant protection on multiple sides. Castles on peninsulas or islands, like Bodiam Castle with its massive surrounding moat, created barriers that siege equipment couldn't cross. Approach routes were deliberately made narrow, winding and exposed, forcing attacking armies to march in thin, vulnerable lines. Some castles only had a single approach path, while others sat above drop-offs that eliminated entire attack angles. Weather worked as a defensive ally, too. Winter winds would blast exposed routes, and spring rains turned dirt paths into mud pits. Nothing ruins a good siege like discovering your heavy siege tower is slowly sinking into 6 inches of mud. At Carrigsonne Castle, frequent rain made the steep limestone cliff nearly impossible to climb safely. The natural terrain also served as a psychological weapon. Imagine marching for days, only to arrive at a castle perched on an impossibly steep cliff or surrounded by treacherous marshland. Many attacking forces lost their nerve before a single arrow was fired. Records show that some sieges were abandoned simply because the attacking army couldn't figure out how to overcome the natural obstacles. Forests were preserved around castles to restrict the movement of siege weapons and provide cover for defenders to launch counterattacks. Castle builders sometimes even engineered the landscape, creating artificial ponds or clearing specific areas to eliminate cover for approaching enemies. These natural defenses were just the beginning of a castle security system. Once attackers reached a castle after battling natural defenses, they faced walls specifically designed to withstand nearly anything. Medieval castle walls weren't just big. They were engineering marvels built to absorb punishment. The sheer size would shock most modern visitors. Many castle walls stood 20 feet thick, about the length of a school bus. Dover Castle's walls measure nearly 21 feet at their thickest. Medieval contractors never had to worry about their clients complaining. I said thick walls, not that thick. This massive thickness served a practical purpose in absorbing energy from battering rams and other siege weapons. Medieval wall construction followed a clever sandwich approach. Workers built 2 parallel stone faces and filled the space between with smaller stones, broken rubble, and mortar. This rubble core created walls both immensely strong and somewhat flexible, able to absorb impacts without cracking. Many featured a sloped base called a talus that deflected attacks upward instead of straight into the wall, making battering rams less effective. It also created a troublesome angle for siege ladders. Medieval architects discovered that slippery slope wasn't just a logical fallacy. It was a great defense strategy. Sophisticated castles featured concentric walls, an outer wall and a taller inner wall, This meant even if attackers breached the first wall, they'd find themselves trapped in a killing zone between walls with defenders shooting from both sides. Talk about being caught between a rock and a hard place. Literally. Some builders incorporated small pebbles into sections where enemy sappers might try to tunnel under walls. These loose materials would shift and make noise when disturbed, alerting guards to digging activities. Medieval alarm systems. No batteries required, just physics and gravel, while these mighty walls could withstand tremendous punishment. Resourceful attackers developed specialized weapons to overcome them. But even the most formidable siege equipment often found its match in the castle's next line of defense. Gatehouses weren't doors, they were mousetraps. But the mice wore armor. The gatehouse represented both the weakest point in castle defenses and, paradoxically, often the strongest. Medieval engineers transformed what could have been a vulnerability into one of history's most ingenious death traps. A typical gatehouse consisted of multiple barriers. First came a drawbridge over the moat. Behind this were heavy wooden doors reinforced with iron. But the true danger lay just beyond. The most crucial defensive element was the portcullis, a heavy wooden or iron grate that could be dropped from above. Many advanced gatehouses featured two portcullises spaced about 20 feet apart. Medieval architects invented the world's first crush zones long before car manufacturers thought of them. Except these were designed to crush people, not absorb impact. The ceiling contained murder holes, openings through which defenders could drop rocks, boiling water, or burning pitch onto trapped attackers. Nothing says unwelcome guest quite like a hot pitch shower from above. Forget oil. That's a Game of Thrones myth. Pitch was cheaper and just as nasty. Some murder holes at major castles measure over a foot wide, allowing for particularly unpleasant surprises. Arrow loops lined the walls, allowing archers to fire from protected positions. These narrow slits gave defenders a wide field of fire, while presenting the smallest possible target. Medieval I can see you, but you can't see me technology. The entire gatehouse usually projected outward from the main walls, creating a three-sided kill box. This arrangement allowed defenders to rain down destruction from above and both sides simultaneously. The gatehouse at Beaumaris Castle extends nearly 40 feet beyond the main walls. Creating a gauntlet, few attackers survived. Some castle designers added devious psychological elements like sharp turns that disoriented attackers and prevented battering rams from building momentum. The medieval equivalent of "you can't get there from here" was literally built into the architecture. The most cunning trick was the false gate, a convincing-looking entrance designed to draw attackers into an even more heavily defended area. Medieval catfishing when that attractive entrance turns out to be a deadly trap. Height offered a crucial advantage in warfare. And medieval castle builders used this principle to devastating effect. The tops of castle walls and towers were sophisticated weapons platforms designed to rain death upon attackers. The castle wall's most recognizable feature, crenellations, weren't just decorative. The raised sections, or merlons, protected defenders, while gaps, or embrasures, allowed them to shoot arrows or throw projectiles. Medieval architects understood social distancing centuries early. Stay behind the stone and shoot through the gaps. Behind these ran the wall walk, a pathway where defenders could move quickly around the perimeter, wide enough for two armored men to pass without anyone awkwardly falling off. Shooting from above gave defenders a significant edge. Longbowmen could fire arrows from 200 yards away, while crossbowmen handled closer targets with armor-piercing bolts. Some towers featured arrow slits arranged to create overlapping fields of fire. Heavier weapons included springles, large crossbow-like devices hurling darts powerful enough to skewer multiple attackers. Nothing brings enemies together quite like being pinned by the same giant dart. Simple physics made for the most terrifying weapons. Heavy rocks dropped from heights of 30 to 60 feet crushed shields, helmets, and the people underneath. A 20-pound rock dropped from 40 feet hits with the force of a horse kick. Defenders heated sand or water contrary to popular belief. Oil was too expensive for regular use to pour through machicolations. Stone projections with floor gaps. Hot sand would get under armor, causing excruciating burns, while boiling water could scald attackers to death. These elevated defenses made direct assaults nearly suicidal. Approaching a medieval castle wasn't as simple as walking up to the front door. Between attackers and those stone walls typically lay a massive ditch, the moat creating a serious problem for invading armies. Just when you thought attacking a castle couldn't get worse, now you need swimming lessons. Most moats measured between 10 to 30 feet wide and 5 to 10 feet deep. While water-filled moats were common, they weren't just about drowning enemies. They prevented tunneling underneath walls, a technique called sapping. As the water table would flood any attempted tunnels, they also forced attackers to build bridges or use boats. Both dangerous options when arrows are raining down. Dry moats worked effectively, too. These deep trenches could contain sharpened stakes, metal spikes called caltrops, or, in warmer regions, even dangerous animals. Nothing says go away quite like a ditch full of snakes. Some castle builders took psychological warfare to new levels by filling moats with sewage and rotting garbage. The smell alone might make attackers reconsider their plans. Crossing these barriers required portable bridges or massive filling operations, where soldiers would dump dirt and timber into sections of the moat, all while being targeted from above. Drawbridges added another clever defense layer. Operated by counterweight systems or chains hidden inside the gatehouse. They could be raised quickly to create an impassable gap. Some advanced castles featured multiple drawbridges in sequence, creating several obstacles to overcome. Interestingly, archaeologists examining Bodiam Castle found its impressive-looking moat was actually quite shallow in many places, suggesting it was designed partly for show. Medieval lords understood that sometimes looking tough was half the battle. Medieval castle towers weren't just impressive stone structures. They were sophisticated battle stations that controlled the entire defensive system, rising up to 100 feet tall. Towers gave defenders the ultimate advantage of height and visibility. First and foremost, towers served as early warning systems. Lookouts stationed at the top could spot approaching armies days before arrival, using smoke signals, fire beacons, or flag systems to alert the castle. The Tower of Constance in France featured a special chamber for signal fires visible 20 miles away. Those medieval lookouts were like human traffic cameras, except instead of speeding tickets, they handed out arrows. Tower design evolved significantly over time. Early square towers had a serious flaw: blind spots at corners where attackers could work unseen. By the 12th century, round or D-shaped towers became standard, eliminating blind spots and making it nearly impossible for battering rams to find flat surfaces to strike. These curved walls also deflected projectiles better than flat surfaces. Strategic placement was crucial. Towers were typically spaced 100 to 200 feet apart, the effective range of a longbow, ensuring overlapping fields of fire where attackers would face arrows from multiple directions simultaneously. Try dodging arrows from multiple directions while climbing a ladder. It's the medieval version of a very unfair video game. Inside. Castle designers created specialized fighting platforms with arrow loops, narrow slits that allowed defenders to shoot while remaining protected. These openings were cleverly splayed inward, giving archers wide visibility while presenting tiny targets to enemies outside. Towers connected to wall walks, allowing defenders to move quickly between positions. Many featured spiral staircases curving clockwise, a small but brilliant detail that gave defenders coming down the advantage while hindering right-handed attackers climbing up. Once the gate slammed shut and the drawbridge raised, a medieval castle transformed from a fortress into a self-contained community. The real challenge wasn't just keeping enemies out, it was keeping everyone inside alive. The original lockdown had nothing to do with pandemics and everything to do with not getting murdered. Food storage formed the backbone of siege survival. Castle designers built massive underground storerooms called undercrofts specifically to hold enough provisions for months of isolation. These cool, dry spaces preserved grain, beans, and dried fruits, staples that could last through long sieges. Barrels of salted fish, smoked meats, and hard cheeses lined the walls. Most castles maintained food stores to last at least 3 to 6 months, with some prepared for a full year of isolation. Dover Castle in England had storage capacity for a garrison of 100 men to survive for nearly a year. Medieval meal prep wasn't about Instagram photos, it was about not starving while arrows flew overhead. Water supply proved even more critical than food, no matter how thick the walls. Thirst would defeat a castle within days without access to clean water. Castle builders solved this problem by digging deep wells directly into the bedrock beneath the central courtyard or keep. Some of these wells reached astounding depths. The well at Qalat es-Salam in Syria plunges 120 feet down. Other castles collected rainwater in massive cisterns that could hold thousands of gallons. The smartest castle designers built their wells before constructing anything else, ensuring workers had water during the years-long building process. Nothing ruins your day quite like spending 5 years building impenetrable walls, then realizing nobody thought about drinking water. Daily life during a siege took place in cramped, uncomfortable conditions. The castle population swelled beyond its normal size as peasants from surrounding lands sought protection behind its walls. Space became precious. Great halls that normally hosted feasts transformed into communal sleeping areas. Privacy vanished. Noble families who typically enjoyed private chambers might share space with dozens of others. Medieval castle Wi-Fi would have had serious bandwidth issues, except the only thing streaming was the occasional leak in the roof. Sanitation presented another major challenge. Castle designers built latrines that emptied through chutes in the outer walls. A simple but effective system during normal times. During sieges. However, these became vulnerable points that enemies could climb or use to start fires. Alternative arrangements included chamber pots, emptied into dedicated waste pits in the courtyard. Some larger castles featured sophisticated systems. Pembroke Castle in Wales had a massive latrine tower that could accommodate 20 people simultaneously. Medieval architects understood no matter how fancy your castle, everybody poops. Health concerns mounted as sieges dragged on. Fresh vegetables quickly ran out, raising the risk of scurvy and other deficiency diseases. Doctors stored herbs and medicines, but their effectiveness was limited by medieval medical knowledge. Castle inhabitants relied heavily on brewing beer and wine, not just for morale, but because the fermentation process made these drinks safer than potentially contaminated water. Beer kept medieval defenders both hydrated and slightly more optimistic about being surrounded by enemies since 1066. The psychological impact of siege life cannot be overstated. Boredom, fear, and claustrophobia affected everyone trapped inside. To combat this, castle life continued with structure and routine. Guards maintained regular watches. Craftspeople continued essential work. And religious services provided comfort and time markers. Games like chess, dice, and backgammon helped pass the endless hours of waiting. Being trapped in a castle during a siege was like the world's worst vacation. Terrible accommodations, limited menu, and the neighbors keep trying to kill you. The most important doors in medieval castles were often the ones nobody could see. Behind massive walls and towers lurked networks of hidden passageways, concealed doors, and secret tunnels that served as both emergency exits and strategic advantages. The original emergency exits didn't have those annoying alarms, but they did occasionally have snakes. Secret escape tunnels, known as posterns or sally ports, allowed defenders to slip out undetected during sieges. These narrow passages typically emerged far from the main castle in wooded areas or ravines. Dover Castle features a famous example, a 200-foot tunnel through solid chalk cliffs that wasn't rediscovered until 1794. These weren't just emergency exits, they were medieval versions of ghosting an unwanted party guest. These hidden routes enabled defensive raids. Small groups could sneak out at night to sabotage enemy siege equipment or attack sentries. Records from the 1216 siege of Dover Castle describe defenders using sally ports for nighttime attacks that destroyed enemy catapults. Most of these exits had multiple sharp turns to prevent enemies from rushing in if they discovered the passage. Some castle tunnels served more practical purposes, connecting different buildings within the complex during peaceful times. These provided convenience during sieges, allowing defenders to move reinforcements quickly without crossing open areas where they might be targeted. False passages represented a darker aspect of these systems, deliberately designed traps for infiltrators. Some led to dead ends where enemies would be cornered. Others contained hidden pits with spikes at the bottom. Carvock Castle in Scotland featured a fake escape tunnel that led to a flooded chamber where intruders would drown. The secrecy of these passages created vulnerability as well as strength. Several castles fell because of betrayal involving hidden entrances. In 1330, Nottingham Castle was penetrated through a forgotten tunnel from a nearby tavern. At Chateau Gaillard, attackers discovered an unguarded toilet chute that allowed them to infiltrate the fortress. The castle designer, who forgot to put guards near the bathroom, probably had a really bad performance review. Medieval siege machines were impressive, but castle defenders weren't just sitting around waiting to be crushed. They developed countermeasures that turned attacking a castle into a deadly game of medieval chess. When attackers rolled up with battering rams, giant logs with metal caps, defenders would drop massive stones directly onto them from the battlements. These weren't pebbles, we're talking about boulders weighing hundreds of pounds that could splinter wood and crush unfortunate soldiers below. The medieval equivalent of dropping a piano on someone's head. Except nobody got a funny tune at the end. Fire was another favorite defender tool. When siege towers, those massive wooden structures on wheels, approached the walls, archers would unleash volleys of flaming arrows at them. Defenders also used long hooks on ropes to grab the towers and pull them off balance. Nothing ruins your day like climbing a 60-foot siege tower only to feel it suddenly leaning sideways like a drunk trying to climb stairs. Trebuchets presented a different challenge. These giant catapults could hurl stones from a distance. So defenders reinforced walls where impacts were expected and conducted nighttime raids to sabotage these machines. Some clever defenders even counted the seconds between launches to predict where to avoid standing. One particularly nasty siege tactic was biological warfare. Attackers would sometimes catapult diseased animal carcasses over the walls. The defenders' response: they catapulted some of the mess right back, along with beehives and wasps' nests. Talk about returning unwanted gifts with interest. Countermining was crucial when attackers tunneled under walls. Defenders dug their own tunnels to intercept them, flooding enemy tunnels with smoke or releasing attack dogs. Many castles kept specialized anti-siege equipment ready, including wooden frames called hoardings that could be quickly assembled to extend the range defenders could drop things from. These active defenses proved medieval defenders weren't just relying on thick walls. They fought back with ingenuity that would make modern military strategists proud. Success in medieval warfare often came down to who could last the longest. Castles turned time itself into a weapon against attackers. Psychological warfare was a key strategy. Defenders would feast on battlements, making sure the smell of roasting meat drifted toward hungry besiegers. Medieval trash talk didn't need words, just a chicken leg waved tauntingly from a tower window. Sieges bankrupted attackers. A typical army in the 1300s cost about 500 gold pieces daily. After weeks of going nowhere, many lords simply ran out of money. The siege of Kenilworth Castle lasted 6 months before attackers gave up. Weather favored defenders. Winter sieges were brutal for armies camping outside. More soldiers died from cold, disease, and hunger than from fighting. Castle residents weren't staying at a 5-star resort, but compared to attackers sleeping in mud, they might as well have been. Castle defenders mastered surprise attacks called sorties, small groups rushing out from hidden gates to target siege equipment or supply lines before quickly retreating. Deception helped, too. Helmets on poles made it seem like more soldiers guarded the walls. Trumpets and drums created the impression of reinforcements arriving. The most effective defense was often patience. About 60% of castle sieges ended with attackers simply giving up. This combination of patience and psychological warfare completed their defensive strategy, turning his stone structures into active participants in medieval power struggles. If this blew your mind, smash that like button. Subscribe for more history vibes, and comment what castle defense would stop an army in its tracks. See you next time.